So I'd like to thank you all for coming to our first Civil and Environmental Engineering lecture. I am Dr. Erin Bell, and I'm the chair of the Civil and Environmental Engineering Department. I'd like everybody to note our new name. Some of our alumni may have known us as Civil Engineering, but as of this fall, we are actually the Department of Civil and Environmental Engineering. And please, if you came in, drop your business card or sign in at the guest book. This is, as I said, our first lecture, and we hope it will be our first of many. So we'd like to be able to contact you and invite you to future events. We'd like to thank FDH Engineering for sponsoring this event tonight. It's only through their generosity that we're able to have this nice venue, and as well as all of the food to have this speaker. So we are very excited to have our guest speaker here tonight. He came to us from Washington, D.C. this morning, and I'm going to turn it over to Professor Joe Daniel to do the introduction.
Thank you, Erin, and welcome everybody. I am excited to introduce our keynote speaker for this inaugural Civil Engineering Fall Lecture Series. It's Mr. Gregory Nadeau, and he became the acting administrator of the Federal Highway Administration on July 30th of this year. Prior to that, he served as the agency's deputy administrator since 2009. Mr. Nadeau has focused significant attention on spearheading the development and administration of the Everyday Counts program. Everyday Counts is Federal Highway's signature initiative, and it's designed to address shortening project delivery time and accelerate the rapid deployment of innovative technology. And this is done using partnering with federal highway teams across the nation, with state DOTs, local partners, stakeholders, and the private and the nonprofit transportation sectors. So please join me in welcoming Greg Nadeau.
Good evening. It is such a pleasure to be here this evening. It's probably important for you to know a little something about my background. One, I live in Maine, Lewiston, Maine to be specific. And therefore, given that I'm a Northern New Englander, I'm a Boston everything fan. I'm also a University of Maine Black Bear fan. So the last time I was in Durham, it's got to be 10 years. I was here to watch the University of Maine Black Bears hockey team defeat the UNH Wildcats, which was a fairly common occurrence back in those days. Not so much lately. Of course, the University of Maine Black Bears have 2 national titles to their name. But in all seriousness, you know, BC and BU have their Hockey East rivalry, and I think comparable to that great historical rivalry is certainly the University of Maine and UNH. We've had some great hockey over the years, and I'm a big hockey fan. So it is very, very much a pleasure for me to be here and close to home with that great hockey tradition here at the UNH, among many great traditions. It is a terrific university, not just for your hockey prowess, but for your academic prowess as well. I'm really honored to be the first speaker in your new Civil and Environmental Engineering Fall Lecture Series, and given that it's World Series time, I hope I'm worthy, a worthy leadoff hitter. And I really want to thank Dr. Daniel for that very kind introduction. And I also want to thank Bruce Springsteen for his part in getting me invited here this evening. The boss is probably unaware of the role he played in getting me here this evening, but it was at a Bruce Springsteen concert in Washington last year where I met Joe. who was at the concert with a former Federal Highway colleague of mine, who is now a national leader in the asphalt industry at the National Asphalt Paving Association. And we began the discussion that ultimately led me here tonight. So thank you, boss, and thank you, Joe. We appreciate it. The decision to come here to kick off the seminar was really very much for me an easy one. I wanted to salute people who are doing research into innovative ways to build and maintain our infrastructure. Sorely needed and a very, very worthy mission, certainly over the next 20 or 30 years, because the country is going to need this discipline, is going to need this commitment, is going to need the collective brain power of that is represented by institutions like this across the country. Our Transportation Secretary, Anthony Fox, uses a very descriptive phrase to describe the state of our infrastructure. He says what we're running is an infrastructure deficit, every bit as important as the federal deficit we hear so much about. Too many of our roads are in bad shape, and as the Secretary likes to describe it, more than 100,000 of our bridges in this nation are old enough for Medicare. And it does get a chuckle now and then, but it's not his only intent. He's trying to make a serious point about the challenges we face in giving the American people and America's businesses the infrastructure they need. It's not an abstract debate. The United States will have another 100 million people to move around by 2050, well within the life of the students we have represented here in this group today. And we're going to need to move about twice as much freight as we move today to support 100 million more people. These are fundamental, indisputable, I call them forces of nature. These are demographics. This is going to drive the essentiality of what we need to do with respect to building and rebuilding America's infrastructure. It is absolutely essential. I can by the way, I can very confidently predict that all those additional people will not be teleworking, notwithstanding current trends. And I'm equally sure that large pallets of freight will not be delivered by drones. So this whole debate about the state of our infrastructure has very real-world implications. It's about shorter, easier, and safer commutes. It's about getting home in time to go to a child's soccer game. It's about helping our businesses grow, compete, and create jobs. That means we need to see transportation as not just a mobility issue, but an economic issue. That's especially true in our underserved communities, where transportation can create what the Secretary and the President call ladders of opportunity, linking people to jobs, to health care, and to other essential services. After all, it's hard for someone to hold and succeed at a good job if they're unable to get to that job in the first place. And so, to those of you starting careers in transportation or thinking about a career in transportation, it's important to keep in mind what transportation is really all about. Transportation isn't just about getting places better, it's about making places better. We urge our team at Federal Highway to always keep that perspective in mind, even as they do what they're trained to do on the planning and engineering sides. You can see that approach at work right here in Durham. Under the leadership of Patrick Bauer, in terms of Federal Highway and our division office here in the state of New Hampshire, because we have a division office in every state, and our team there, an excellent team, one of the best in the country, we've partnered with New Hampshire DOT and its great team, led by Chris Clement, Commissioner Chris Clement, who's here tonight, an alum, and not because he's sitting here, but partially because he's sitting here. One of the great leaders of state DOTs in the country who really has made a commitment to innovate and to be innovative and to fight for what I've just been talking about. Resources necessary to invest in the infrastructure that the state of New Hampshire is going to need for our kids and our grandkids to prosper. So leaders like Chris Clement are rare and critically important. He needs you to join him in supporting the kind of infrastructure we need to support the rebuilding of America in the form of engineers and planners and environmental engineers, all critical to making it happen in the long run. A number of local projects, I think, are illustrative, like bike ped improvements along Main Street and improvements to the depot that serves Amtrak and your bus service here at the university. Those are the kinds of investments that matter and impact communities. And they're the kind of investments that can result from the federal, state, and local partnership, and the kind of strategic investment that New Hampshire is making in communities across the state. I'm particularly proud of the role I played in my background in my days with Maine Governor Angus King and Deputy Commissioner of Maine DOT when we launched the Downeaster service, which stops right here at the Durham campus, which I hoped I could have used to get to Portland tonight when I go home. Unfortunately, the next train, the 7 o'clock train, is not something I could have made, and I'm not going to wait around for the next one. But I did, my getting here and getting back to Washington has been and will be a multimodal experience. I flew into Logan. I drove or was driven up here. I'm going to be driven to Portland. I'm going to get home that way. But I'm going to come back on Sunday using an intercity bus service, express to Logan. It's that kind of coordinated, streamlined, connected system that this country is going to need, particularly as we welcome and integrate into the population 100 million people. We're going to have to move them. And by the way, that population growth is going to be concentrated largely in 11 mega regions of the country. And we're in one of them. Not necessarily Durham, New Hampshire, but certainly Boston. And the Northeast is host to several of those mega regions. Now, what's going to happen is that population growth is going to grow enormous demand for goods, for services. Now, what's that mean? The middle of the country is going to have opportunity to produce those goods. The agricultural industry is going to obviously have a serious role to play in supporting the growth of this nation. The energy sector, which is changing before our eyes, and the middle of the country is in a big way involved in the manufacturing and production and development of energy innovation. So we're all in this together. Although the growth is going to occur in population in the mega regions of the country, it's going to have national significant benefit across the country in terms of the growth of the economy and our position in the world. What do we need for that? Transportation. We need infrastructure. We need a highway system that can move those goods, move those agricultural goods, move those manufactured goods to the West Coast, to the East Coast, move the goods we do produce here to the middle of the country. It's a national economy, and it's a connected system. And if we don't tend to our knitting, make the investments necessary to maintain and grow and develop the greatest transportation system in the world, which is what our parents and grandparents did for us, then we have squandered our inheritance, and we have failed to make our commitment to our children and grandchildren. It's really that simple. I'm at the tail end of the baby boomers. There might be a few people here ahead of me. But the reality is, my generation and the baby boomers ahead of me failed to make the necessary investment in the system that our parents and grandparents made. And we are still in a position to do something about that. And that's what Congress is going to be debating very soon. So again, those of you starting careers in transportation or thinking about a career in transportation really are in the position to be at the cutting edge of making a real serious contribution to the future of the country. But also, you're at the cutting edge of a growing opportunity with respect to career opportunities. Rebuilding America's infrastructure isn't discretionary. Has to happen. It's just a matter of time. How are we going to pay for it? When are we going to pay for it? Policymakers will struggle. Politics will ensue. Policymaking will evolve. But at some point, guess what? We're going to have to figure it out, because that bridge will no longer tolerate the traffic it's currently carrying. We're going to have to either post it or shut it down. That highway is going to fall apart. The infrastructure we count on to move those goods and services and people is simply not going to be made available. And unfortunately, in our business, it's kind of an evolutionary process. It's like a cancer that is insidious but sort of grows unknowingly. And by the time it reveals itself, it's too late. The infrastructure asset has gone beyond its useful life, has not had the proper investment. The cost of recovering that asset is significantly more. You all know this. We all understand this. Policymakers have got to address it. We talked about some examples of how it impacts a community, the collaboration that a state DOT and local government can have with the support of the federal government to do good things. While the technical details that go into any project are critically important, I think it's always important to focus on the bottom line, which is the end result, that real people use this system, families depend on it in terms of their daily lives. It's integral to everything we do. If you don't drive a car, that box of Cheerios didn't end up on that grocery shelf by itself. It took a transportation system to get it there. So if you live in a major urban environment and you've never owned an automobile, you have an absolute dependency on that highway system to get those goods to market. Although I suppose it is possible that the drones will deliver your box of Cheerios. But in the meantime, for the next half century or so, I think the traditional method is going to prevail. So, like much of what's happening in Washington lately, the question of funding, which is most things in life, is central. And Congress is grappling with it. But our funding process has featured its share of 11th-hour drama and a series of short-term extensions. And that's exactly what transportation planners, builders, contractors, executives don't need. Even at its best, and we're going to talk about ways to improve the project delivery process in a minute. It takes years to plan, design, and build a major project. When you start that process, you need to be reasonably sure that the money you're counting on will actually be there when it's needed. Right now, people at places like the Hampshire DOT and my friend Chris don't have that certainty. For example, over the summer, Congress patched the Highway Trust Fund just days before it was scheduled to become insolvent. The trust fund is the main source of funding for our highway program, and an insolvency would have had disastrous impact, putting tens of thousands of projects on hold and more than 700,000 jobs at risk. Little known fact, Chris knows this fact, on average across the country, state DOT capital programs depend on federal funding to the tune of anywhere from 45 to 50% on average. Some states are even higher than the average. So think about that. The principal partner in funding capital projects for state and local governments in the federal aid highway system, which is most of the system that moves 92% of the traffic, half of that dependency is the federal government, who have not addressed long-term funding needs or a long-term funding source in over 20 years. The gas tax, which is the principal source of funding that replenishes the Highway Trust Fund, hasn't been raised since 1992. Think about that. And when you factor in inflation, that 18.4 cents a gallon has probably got the buying power of about 11 cents. So the federal government, our national government, has failed to keep pace with the needs of the national system and the need to invest in it. States have had by far more aggressive efforts to maintain their level of effort or grow their level of effort in the absence of federal commitment. So the hour has come We've been dealing with the transition on how to deal with funding our national investment in transportation infrastructure since 2009. We can't put it off any longer, and Congress, after the election, is going to once again be dealing with that. So, what they did in addressing that patch, that insolvency, is essentially came up with a solution that expires come spring. Once again, we're going to be facing an 11th hour drama. We're going to be facing potential insolvency on the eve of the next construction season. So more patches are not what we need. We need a long-term investment plan and solution for the greatest country and economy in the world if we're going to maintain our global competitiveness and continue to lead the world economically. So how do you make plans in a scenario like that? If you're running a capital program, you're trying to figure out how you're going to allocate your resources. How can you do that? How can you have a rational capital program if you don't know where your next dollar is going to come from 6 months from now? You can't, is the honest answer. So you're going to evaluate, do you invest in state of good repair, maintenance activities, and forego any kind of initiation of major capital projects, which could be a 75-year-old bridge that is critical to the mobility of your community, to the regional mobility of the movement of freight, a bridge that may be at risk of being posted or even closed. Do you forego that major capital investment because you don't know what money you're going to have for the next 3 or 4 years? Because these projects don't happen overnight. So these are the kinds of, these are the struggles that state DOTs across the country are facing. Not knowing what long-term investment plan they can possibly afford or where that money is going to come from. So the Obama administration offered something called the Grow America Act as a possible solution. It was a 4-year, $302 billion bill, which represents a 37% increase over the current level of funding, MAP 21. And it was paid for without increasing the deficit, which is a shrinking deficit, by the way, by passing what we call a common sense pro-growth tax reform measure, which a lot of people ridicule is not a real way to raise money. The kind of reform that members of both parties, though, have advocated. Interestingly, the president's plan for pro-growth business tax reform was relatively mirrored by a plan that Congressman Dave Camp, the chairman of the Ways and Means Committee, conservative Republican. Remember, the House is controlled by the Republicans, the Senate by the Democrats. And the president is obviously a Democrat. But the conservative House chairman of T&I and the president's plan, you can put them side by side, and they were relatively close, pretty much in the ballpark of one another. So you had major leaders on opposite sides of the spectrum coming together on a plan, a tax reform plan that could spin off enough revenue to essentially increase the commitment to surface transportation investment by somewhere between 30 and 40%. Going nowhere. Gets caught up in this ever, ending cycle of inability to move things along in the United States Congress. So we offered Grow America as a starting point because it focuses debate on where it should be, on the future, not on short-term fixes, not on the next patch, not on how we're going to get through the next fiscal year or the next Highway Trust Fund crisis, but how we're going to figure out a way to fund long-term transportation investments so Commissioner Clement and his team can figure out what their long-term investment plan is going to be. So, but I'm an optimist. I really am. There are many in Congress who are looking at some very interesting ideas along these lines. The Senate Finance Committee, T&I, Chairman Schuster, who's from Pennsylvania, the chairman of the Transportation Infrastructure Committee, has been very aggressive in making the case that we have to find a way to make this investment. So there's a lot of interesting conversation going on in Congress, and obviously the The administration is anxious to sit down with Congress and look at our ideas, their ideas. We have to solve this problem. We have to figure out how we're going to rebuild America's infrastructure, and including and especially our surface transportation infrastructure, which has been in decline for too long. So that's what's going on in the context of Washington and the context of supporting the kind of investment that is going to be required to sustain our place in the world. It's going to happen. I have complete faith because it must happen. So you're pursuing an interesting field. The innovation that your faculty bring to you in the classroom every day is what we're going to depend on to get the job done in the future, because we have to demonstrate to policymakers that we are constantly in pursuit of innovation, and we are excellent stewards of taxpayer dollars. That the dollars that our taxpayers contribute, that our policymakers labor hard to raise, are going to be invested wisely and effectively and efficiently. That's the job of the transportation community, of transportation professionals, because we have to make that case if our policymakers will be successful in raising those additional dollars that we need to invest. So 5 years ago, we launched an initiative that was referenced earlier with our state, local, and private sector partners, and importantly, our academic partners. And it's called Everyday Counts. EDC, as we call it, was designed to bring about a culture change in transportation by advancing faster, better, smarter ways of doing business through innovative strategies and innovative technologies. That's kind of how I capture the essence of what Everyday Counts is about. But as I indicated earlier, transportation impacts people's lives. And so we said from the start that Everyday Counts wasn't going to be a pilot or a lab experiment or a political initiative. It was going to be dedicated to changing the way we think about how we introduce innovation into the work we do. And we weren't pursuing innovation for its own sake. We were looking for innovative ways to really improve how we do our business, how we affect people's lives, and how we affect communities. We had to shorten the time it takes to deliver new projects. Time is money in our business, and it was unnecessary. We could still accomplish the policy objectives that have been established by being more efficient about the way we deliver projects, number one. Making our roads safer. It's our number one priority, and the number one priority of every state DOT in the country. And how do we do that? By getting efficient about how we deliver projects, because almost invariably every highway project and bridge project in the country makes a contribution to safety by making the system more mobile or actually making the particular asset safer. If you're modernizing an interchange in an interstate, for example, or widening a bridge because it simply has outlived its design life. All those investments improve safety. And the quicker we get those investments delivered, obviously the safer the system is. So efficiency in project delivery has many benefits. Reducing congestion has great environmental benefit. So freight can move efficiently. The cost of congestion to the movement of freight isn't just a cost to business. It's a cost that's passed on to consumers. So although we may not be willing or able to get revenue generated by some form, whether it's taxation or fees or some other mechanism, we're paying for that congestion every day in a higher cost of goods or services that we're paying to subsidize the cost to business as a result of that congestion that can be addressed in a number of ways. Protecting and improving the environment. It's a health issue. It's necessary in order to deliver these projects with less resistance, projects that have to serve the community, not negatively impact it. It's good business. A preserved natural environment is good for communities, it's good for local economies, and that has been proven time and time again. And environmental policies associated with the delivery of highway projects and bridge projects and other surface transportation projects can be incorporated in a way that has positive environmental outcomes and doesn't have negative project delivery impacts. And that's what we're committed to doing with our state and local partners, and we're having tremendous success around the country. So in each round of Everyday Counts, and we just started our third round, unbelievably, we introduce about a dozen innovations. Because we began with the notion, if we do too much, I mean, my own sort of philosophy was, if everything's a priority, nothing's a priority. So we had to work with our partners and say, these are the things we're going to focus on. And Everyday Counts is a 2-year cycle. We spend the first year working to identify the innovations that will make a difference. We develop the implementation strategies. We're holding summits right now, rolling them out to our partners across the country. There was one in Louisville and St. Louis this week. I'm going out to California for one in Sacramento next week. We're going to have one in Portland, Maine, right here in New England in a few weeks. That's how we essentially sit with our partners and say, these are the innovations, these are how they work. You now, states and local governments, you decide what works for you. Because every state's different. Every state has a different approach to how they deliver projects, a different state legal framework they may have to comply with. But basically, the federal aid program requires sort of a framework of project delivery responsibilities that are augmented by the responsibilities of the states and the requirements the states may have. And state DOTs and local transportation agencies work very closely together, and state DOTs have a lot of influence on the standards, the specifications, the practices that local governments use. So we've got 52 state DOTs in this country that have enormous market power and enormous influence on how we decide certain standards and practices associated with project delivery. So we partnered with those 52 state DOTs through our national partner, the American Association of State Highway Transportation Officials, AASHTO, which, as you know, plays a major role in setting standards and engineering standards and other practices for the Surface Highway Transportation Program in particular. So that was the genesis of what Everyday Counts was about, what we were attempting to attack and approach, or a way we were going to approach sort of generating this national conversation and engagement. It wasn't a conference. It wasn't somewhere where we could speak theoretically about ideas. It was, let's find proven, tested, successful methods, often used in states, and provide national penetration of those ideas to the marketplace. Safety Edge in our first round of Everyday Counts. It was a very simple tool attached to a paver. And all it does is creates this angle at the edge of the pavement and compresses it. And prior to that, the pavement simply sloughed off at the end and you put your backfill against it, it's gone. But that backfill erodes and that edge was exposed. And if a car goes off that edge, recovering from that is often very hazardous and overcorrects. You come into the oncoming lane. Those kinds of crashes, particularly on rural highways, were very common. And our highest fatalities are on rural highways, off-road accidents. This edge simply made it easier for a car that goes off the edge to recover. This is now common practice around the country. 40 states have adopted specs for this particular tool. When we started Everyday Counts in 2009, I think 2 states even knew what Safety Edge was. So all it took were DOTs to collectively say, we now understand what this technology does, and within a year and a half, 40 states had essentially developed and adopted specs. It's nothing more than information sharing. It's nothing more than ideas that have been successful and engaging with the community and the decision makers who make it happen on understanding that success. And believe me, the one thing a state DOT responds to is the success of another state DOT. They work together. It's a very tight-knit community. So the people that know best what's going to work are the people in the state that understand the system within they operate under, but are open to changing the way they do business and open to a culture of innovation. I like to say, the old former Speaker of the House, Tip O'Neill, used to say all politics is local. I think all innovation is local because it's you and your contractors and your academic institutions like this one who do such incredible work map out the path to how we're going to improve the way we do business, the materials we use, the processes we use, the technologies that are developed, typically and often come from academic institutions and academic institutions with engineering disciplines. We have our own research capability, the heralded and really highly honored, I think, Turner Fairbanks facility, but we depend on the interaction with institutions of higher education, obviously across America, but across the world. It's a network that is constantly striving to find new and better approaches to how we do our jobs, whether it's materials and involved with how we build bridges or other mechanisms. So, because I believe that we approached this national commitment to innovation at the level it had to be approached, and engage state and local agencies in the leadership of this effort, because frankly, it has to be engaged, it has to happen at the local level. We don't deliver projects. State DOTs and local transportation agencies do. Contractors and consultants do. They're the ones that have to collaborate, engage, and agree to pursue a different course of doing business to create the efficiencies we're looking for. 45 states have developed something called State Transportation Innovation Councils. And what those are, we call them STICs for short. When we began Everyday Counts, it wasn't so much a strategy at the beginning, it was an outcome from the type of engagement that these summits and this collaboration with state DOTs created. We thought what we were looking for at the state level was collaboration between the state DOTs, local agencies, academia, contractors, consultants, local governments, LTAPs, TTAPs, a local transportation assistance program. New Hampshire's is based right here at UNH. Those were our conduits between the state DOTs and the local transportation agencies, because everything the state DOTs are looking at, learning about, and considering could have just as much benefit, if not more in some cases, for local transportation agencies. So not just the 260,000 miles of the national highway system we're addressing here. We're addressing the entire 2 million miles, or 4 million miles if you include all the local roads. Obviously, the innovations we're talking about can have broad impact across the system, which of course is important to America and important to states and local governments. So these 45 states, including New Hampshire, have created these State Transportation Innovation Councils. And that really has resulted in the National Innovation Network, something that sort of grew out of this effort over the last 4.5 years. And every state, then the states that don't have a stick, who have not stood one up, they're still involved in deploying innovation. Every state in the country has deployed at least 2 or more EDC innovations, or they're involved in deploying Sharp 2 products that are now in the implementation stage. Every state in the country, every state DOT in the country is involved in deploying innovation in one way or another. But what we have here is the nucleus, actually basically the critical mass of these state councils. And what we're talking about with our friends at the summits this season is, what do we do with them? How do we build on that? How do we energize and facilitate this kind of commitment on an ongoing basis that'll last long after federal highway administrators or state DOT commissioners are done with our contributions to this world? This has got to continue on an ongoing basis. So the stakeholder collaboration that creates, the engagement of universities and local technical assistance programs, the engagement with communities is all an outcome of this kind of collaboration. Very specific examples of what types of innovations we're talking about. Memorial Bridge in Portsmouth was actually replaced using 2 EDC innovations. And by the way, EDC didn't invent these innovations. We're in the business of deploying, partnering, facilitating. These innovations came out of long experience from research, development, to commercialization, to state DOTs experimenting with them. Long road to proving their effectiveness came before the actual application. But one is design build. It's a form of innovative contracting, and exactly what it sounds like. The designer and the builder function as a unit, which leads to a much more efficient process. It's also about transferring of risk. You give the builder, the consortium, the ability to essentially be very innovative, very creative. You tell them what you want, you set a budget, they go to work delivering the goods, and the owner is the beneficiary at the end. And you usually get something done faster, and you get it done in often cases less expensive, but not always. Because you may want to invest a little more, pay a little premium to get a bridge done faster, or get it built in a way that creates less disruption to a community. Maybe it's a high-volume bridge. You can't afford to interrupt traffic if you got 100,000 cars a day and trucks using that bridge. You can't close it for 3 years if you don't have a good alternative. There are techniques that can be applied to accelerate the replacement of that bridge or the rehab of that bridge, and the kind of innovation that these contractors bring to the table when you have a flexible contracting method that allows that sort of dynamic to occur. The state also used, in that case, an innovation called alternative technical concepts, which allows contracts to bring their expertise and often proprietary concepts to the table and try ideas that have worked for them in the past. But key is their confidential ideas can be protected under the bidding environment. So again, you encourage contractors to bring their best ideas to the table, but ensure that their proprietary technology or innovation is protected until the bidding process is concluded. That's the kind of innovation that Chris and his team brought to the Memorial Bridge project, and the kind of impact that these initiatives can result in, because that particular project opened in August 2013, which was 6 months earlier than other proposals had suggested could be done. So in addition to design build, we're advancing another form of innovative contracting known as construction manager general contractor, or CMGC for short. The designer and builder aren't the same entity, but they work closely together during the design phase to tap into the builder's expertise. We bring the contractor and the designer together early. What does that do? The contractor may have some very specific, innovative ideas on how to avoid moving utilities, how to utilize less right-of-way, all things that contribute to time a project might take to deliver or increase the cost that a project might require. So this kind of innovation is going to speak directly to what we as transportation professionals are going to have to bring to the table. We're going to have to get more bang for our buck. We're going to have to deliver more projects for the money we have, because we're never going to have all the money we need to address all of our infrastructure issues. So this is the kind of innovation and process and technology innovation that we have to bring to our responsibilities. So the city of Concord, another example, is using this innovation that is CMGC and its a complete streets project. And that's the first use, I believe, in New Hampshire of CMGC, except that Maine and New Hampshire DOTs are collaborating on the replacement of the Sarah Mildred Long Bridge, which is going to be done using CMGC methods. So these tools are at work here in New Hampshire and in Maine and across the country, and they're already proving to make a big difference. These innovations I talk about, CMGC, design build, were codified in MAP 21, which is our current authorization bill, our surface transportation bill. What that did was CMGC required permission from the federal government, and we could only let states do it under an experimental authority that we have under statute. What Congress did is essentially eliminated that requirement and essentially said, states, you want to use CMGC, you can't. So now states have got to get their own legal authority within the states and their procurement laws, but the federal government, through this act in Congress, essentially said go for it. So Congress in MAP 21 had a number of provisions dealing with project delivery, many of which were pioneered under the Everyday Counts initiative and by the states. But what they did importantly was codified a lot of it, so there was less doubt or no doubt that these provisions and these authorizations were clearly stated in statute and states could really run with them. So it cuts red tape by, in a number of ways, and there's what may be what I think was the simplest and most profound initiative that we put forward. Programmatic agreements, which have been around for years. We didn't invent them. But what we have done is increased the number of agreements updated or developed to address efficiency in project delivery. I'll use one quick example. You're building a bridge. The Endangered Species Act identifies certain species that are threatened. A programmatic agreement is developed. You identify every endangered species listed in your state. You identify every conceivable surface transportation project, a bridge project, a highway project. You essentially negotiate with the federal resource agencies and the state resource agencies what the mitigation strategy is going to be. You got an Indiana bat, you got a bridge project, you know in advance what you've got to do to mitigate, or you have an expanded programmatic mitigation strategy for the Indiana bat, which essentially offsets the impact that bridge project is going to have. All of that is done in advance, programmatically, versus doing that same mitigation strategy, bridge project after bridge project after bridge project after bridge project, which costs money and time. Nebraska's adopted what I call the matrix, which essentially is the endangered species model I just talked to you about, but it applies to wetlands, it applies to categorical exclusion programmatic agreements that, again, Congress authorized an expansion of, which accelerates the delivery of local projects that are done within the existing right-of-way. A lot of common sense things that allow us to focus and invest in the real environmental challenges that we face and not deal with routine project-by-project environmental processes in expensive and cumbersome ways that'll have no environmental benefit whatsoever. This is something the environmental community is embraced, has welcomed. We have had no controversy. We've absolutely streamlined the process of either environmental document preparation, utilizing this tool, or permitting. So, and we're at it. I think since we rolled out the initiative in 2009, we have 170, I think we're up to, new or expanded agreements across the country. And I think 5 or 10 years from now, we may have another 500, because it's a constant process of figuring out how we can streamline these processes to accelerate project delivery and enhance environmental outcomes by looking at environmental challenges on a programmatic level. So another example, which is one of my favorites and one of the Secretary's favorites, and it's kind of in honor of Dr. Daniel and her career, long focus on all things pavement. It's a very popular Everyday Counts innovation, and it's called warm mix asphalt. As you know, many of you know, it can be produced at lower temperatures, lower than hot mix, which has been the conventional asphalt used in the country. So back in 2009, this is all being explained to me. And I'm being told that you can produce asphalt, lower temperatures, using less fuel. There are certain properties about it that actually provide benefit, compression stuff and all. Joe can tell you what all that means, I don't know. All I know is we could buy asphalt cheaper. It extended the paving season in cold weather states. Because it uses less fuel to produce, it reduced air emissions. So my question was, why isn't everybody using it? And there really wasn't a good answer, except it just hadn't caught on. Again, through the Everyday Counts mechanism, we partnered with states. We evaluated the benefits. We discussed it and set a 2-year implementation plan, which began with states essentially adopting standards, metrics, specifications. That's all it took. 40 states did it within 2 years. In 2009, about 4% of total asphalt production in the country was war mix asphalt. By the end of 2013, it was upwards of 30%, and it's growing. NAPA, which obviously is the national expert in asphalt, projected that this is pretty much going to be standard in the next very few years. So what does that mean? Well, by 2013, we estimated the use of warm mix saved about $600 million for state and local transportation agencies. We project by 2020 we'll save $3 billion if the trajectory continues in terms of the use of warm mix asphalt. That's money that state and local agencies have to spend on projects, on other maintenance activities, because a lot of those costs are in their maintenance budgets. So it's nothing more than a rational utilization of technology that had been developed long ago. We just had to create a critical mass, critical demand nationally for the product, which would give the asphalt producers, who were very much behind this and partnered with us to implement it, the ability to invest in the conversion of their plants to switch from hot mix to warm mix. That conversion is underway, it's happening, and it's going to have, obviously, long-term effects. If we replaced all the hot mix we produce in this country today with warm mix asphalt, that would be the equivalent of taking 1.5 million cars a year off the road with respect to greenhouse gas emissions. Think about the things we do to mitigate the impact we have on the environment in terms of what we must do to maintain and grow the nation's infrastructure. This one thing has that kind of ability to impact. We were talking earlier about the range of research that's going on in the asphalt world, and certainly in bridge construction and how we deliver bridge projects. It's a constant commitment to ongoing improvement as to how we do our jobs and what we do and how it impacts our natural environment. I think I've got more I can say, but I really want to engage with you and hear what you have to say. There's work we're doing in the climate world that's really exciting. We have a study going on in Mobile, Alabama, that's narrowing the gap between climate change science and engineering practice. It's going to be some really good work I think you're going to utilize in your studies or your teaching in time. Part of the study is focused on how to design new roads and bridges to make them more resilient to climate risk, or how to retrofit infrastructure we already have. We just had a $50 billion lesson called Sandy as to why it's so critical to design and build transportation infrastructure to withstand the effects of major climate events. And notwithstanding, some that believe that climate change is anywhere from a hoax to not completely proven, I think the evidence is in that there's something going on, and that we certainly have ample evidence to ensure that we're beginning to build and design our infrastructure in a more intelligent, resilient manner. So it's a major commitment of Federal Highway, the US DOT, and the Secretary, and DOTs across the country are similarly engaged in partnering with us to discover and commit to those types of remedies. Universities across the world, and certainly across the country, including UNH, are very interested and focused on some very interesting research in this area. So this is a business. The Federal Aid Highway Program is by law described as state administered and federally assisted. So what that means is you in New Hampshire, the state DOT, which really is the owner of most of the system, the steward of the surface transportation system in many respects, partnering with local governments, must engage with the stakeholders who they depend on to help deliver the goods. And that's what things like the State Transportation Innovation Council do, and Chris's leadership on that and other innovative commitments in New Hampshire really is what makes this possible. It's the states that are going to drive it, It's the states that lead it, and it's the states that will have the most impact on it, given that the highway system in particular is owned by states. But it's a national network that the Federal Highway Administration partners with them to try and knit together and maintain and make more seamless. Because when I was in Maine as Deputy Commissioner of DOT, I'd be going to talk to a paper company. They weren't particularly interested in getting their paper from one end of the state to the other efficiently. They're interested in getting it to the mid-Atlantic markets or the Midwest or overseas. So the manufacturers, the businesses that depend on us to maintain and develop a system that they can use efficiently so they can be more competitive, that's a significant responsibility, because that's what leads to job growth. That's what leads to maintaining and sustaining higher incomes. It's that kind of investment that we, as governments, as the general public, must ensure is made. There's absolutely essential to the growth of the economy. We are on an absolute steady growth path right now from the recovery from the Great Recession. Boy, I'll tell you, sometimes our memories are short. I remember being really scared when we were going through what looked like an economic and financial system meltdown. And the recovery over the last several years has been remarkable, but I think it's largely in part, I think, to some good, sound policy making, but I think it's also a recognition of the resiliency of the American people and how strong we are and how committed we are to ensuring that we leave for our children and our grandchildren a better America than we inherited. In the case of surface transportation, we inherited one of the greatest transportation systems in the world. We haven't done our part in sustaining and maintaining it and building on it. But it's not too late. We can still do it, and our kids and grandkids will be the beneficiary, because they're going to be the stewards of, hopefully, the strongest economy in the world, which is important globally, because we are not only global economic leaders, we are value leaders in the global community. And the stronger America is, the better off the world is. And we aren't going to be strong if we don't have basic infrastructure to support the growth of our economy. So everybody understands that. Congress is grappling with it. We're going to keep working toward it. But in the meantime, transportation professionals and future transportation professionals like you are going to be figuring out how we can do it faster, better, cheaper, more sustainably, using the kind of products that come out of a research university like this. You're really going to be, you are the future leaders. Your faculty are the current leaders, the current innovators, partnering with people like Chris Clement and New Hampshire DOT, and that's happening all over the country, and we're pretty proud of that. So we're going to keep doing what we can to facilitate it, but it's really going to happen here on the ground. So thanks very much, and I'm really looking forward to however many questions you have and however long you can take it. Thank you very much. Students or faculty or both?
Both.
Oh, okay. Got somebody. Okay.
Once you convince the politicians that the money needs to be spent, and you have the money to spend, how do you convince the politicians to keep their hands off of where it should be spent?
That's obviously a reference to earmarking. Yeah. In the last, since Safety Lou expired, earmarking became a very high-profile political issue. The president basically announced he would not sign a bill that had earmarking as it had essentially evolved. It went from being a relatively selective tool to widespread implementation. I mean, in the state of Maine, back when I was a deputy commissioner, we basically had virtually our entire program earmarked. That doesn't suggest that members of Congress don't have very legitimate needs that they want addressed in their districts. I would say most projects that were earmarked were valid, were important. The problem is when you have a limited amount of resource and you have to pick and choose and prioritize, it's hard to do it in that sort of disconnected way. So they stopped. Earmarks, and a lot of people didn't believe it would be sustained, but since 2009, in terms of future appropriations bills and these extensions, there have not been earmarks in those bills. So the president basically took a stand. Leadership in Congress, both parties, I think were agreeable. Things like the Tiger program evolved, which was a way to put money aside that could address projects that didn't fit in the traditional formula funding approach that the Federal Aid Highway Program and the Federal Transit Administration program generally depends on. So Tiger became an approach where we would go out to the states, local agencies, authorities, a number of eligible entities, bring forward innovative projects, creative projects, and they'll compete and basically be awarded dollars on their merits. I think generally speaking and overall it's been a pretty well received. I mean there was always criticism, but generally speaking I think the transportation community and most of the policymaker community have think it's been pretty well handled and pretty objective. So it's a model that can be looked to have dollars that Congress sets aside available to invest in projects that just don't fit in the traditional mold. Often multimodal projects, about a third, I think. If you go to the beginning of Tiger to the current allocation, were freight-related projects because it's hard under the formula programs to put money that, into highways and into bridges and into ports and into rail. And sometimes a strategic investment in moving freight involves a multimodal approach. So they're dollars that were more flexible and able to deal with sort of unique elements. So that's one model, but basically, thus far, earmarks are a thing of the past, although they could come back in some other form. But what we have in the Federal Aid Highway Program is a very robust, consistently applied planning process in every state, public involvement, objective analysis, prioritization. So we really have a system in place where even policymakers can say, okay, here's some money, state, you've got a prioritized list that came out of a public process, use it. So, so basically I think it's largely local decisions. Project selection in our program is very much a state and local decision, but the result of a robust planning process. So I think we've made great strides, and I think as the resources get more constrained, and obviously in the infrastructure business, the demand is going to constantly grow, particularly if we're underinvesting, you have to prioritize. And I think the policymakers have more and more begun to defer the process by which we do that to the transportation professionals because, frankly, you have to justify your decision-making more now than ever. And we're also, importantly, under MAP 21, we're in the process of implementing a performance-based program. So states are now in the process and once we get the rulemaking done, establishing performance measures, setting performance targets. So the way we approach investment prioritization in the program is really going to change at the state level quite dramatically over time. So I think all of those things are contributing to a more analytic, data-driven approach to project selection. See, I don't get a lot of questions at these things because my answers are too long.
In your last position, which I'm sure you're still managing right now, what technical innovation, what was the best technical innovation, the most promising technical innovation that you saw that would really have the greatest potential long
In my former position, you mean?
Well, it's every day counts.
Oh, you mean at the federal level, not Maine DOT, yeah. I think I touched on a couple of them. But we could spend a lot more time than we have. I mean, 3D modeling. That was an innovation we rolled out in EDC 2 and we're continuing in EDC 3 because it holds the potential, along with geospatial data collaboration. It's basically the digitization of how we do projects. E-construction, E-NEPA. Those are terms you'll become more familiar with. We're looking at the whole project delivery process as a continuum. So E-NEPA is essentially something we actually developed at Federal Highway. We manage the software. It's free to states. It's basically going to be the platform that states, environmental resource agencies, consultants can access, if you allow them to, so that we're all working on the same digital platform. So as you're developing an environmental document, which is hundreds of pages, you're going through a review process with other agencies. The literal passing of paper back and forth could take months. It's going to enable us to, in real time, share documents and concurrently review them. And we think it's essentially revolutionary in the preparation of environmental impact statements, environmental assessments. So that's being deployed right now. We have 3D modeling, the digitization of construction plans as a one simple application. Automated equipment, which has enormous potential to reduce costs for contractors. We're not going to get all those savings passed on as the owner, but the more you reduce the cost, and the market will adjust and be more competitive, and the owner will benefit as a result. That's fundamental economics, supply and demand, competition, all that stuff. So the contractors drove, as one of our partners, 3D modeling, for example, geospatial data collaboration, all the tools, the digital tools necessary to begin to utilize a number of applications. So the digitization of the project delivery process, I think, is kind of the result of a number of initiatives, and I'm not sure 3 years ago I got that, but as it comes together and contractors share with me the benefits they're going to receive, it's pretty exciting. So I'll sort of answer the question in a general sense. The digitization of the project delivery process that will probably evolve over the next 2 or 3 years. So it's going to change the way we do business, in the scheme of things, overnight. Because DOTs are in tune with it. They're working with their contractors, and it's going to be something that doesn't require a major investment. Investment in training, investment in personnel is why it takes long. You simply have to take the time to get your personnel up to speed on how it works and get the whole system together. But that's one area. I talked about programmatic agreements. I think that's just a process innovation that just makes so much sense. But the process of bringing all those agencies together and negotiating the agreements, sometimes it can take a couple of years. And what's the first thing to go when a DOT is constrained, has less resources, is faced with reducing headcount? It's not going to be your maintenance people. And it shouldn't be, because you have to maintain the system. Got to plow the snow. It's going to be your planning personnel, the type of technical expertise you need to do that sort of thing. So one of the things we've advocated so hard for programmatic agreements, for example, is federal government's facing the same thing. Fish and Wildlife Service, they've got to sign off on an environmental document. I guarantee you no federal agencies looking at any possibility of gaining headcount. We're frozen, we're shrinking. I've got to find 120 full-time equivalent employees the next fiscal year because Congress reduced our administrative budget. So we're constantly struggling with resources ourselves. The more efficient you make these processes, the more you can do with the complement of personnel you have now. So it's an innovation that has impacts beyond just project delivery. It has the potential to enable us as federal agencies, as state agencies, to do more with less. Lots of others, but we don't have time. Somebody was, yeah, go ahead.
How do you think the innovations coming in terms of smart roads and self-operated automobiles is going to change the nature of highway operation in the next couple of decades? You talk about 2050, you could have, 100 million more people. So you're implying there's going to be a lot more roads. Well, I'm thinking with smart roads and smarter cars, you might be able to use the same capacity right now. Still be okay. So you guys thinking about
Absolutely. And we better be successful because there are many highway assets that we literally don't really have the option to expand, either just physically or it's just prohibitively expensive because of right-of-way acquisition costs and all of those sorts of things. You can always build up, you can always put, another layer of highway over a highway, but there's just limitations on the resource. The automated vehicle, vehicle-to-vehicle communication, vehicle-to-infrastructure communication is going to enable us in the future to essentially get more capacity out of the existing highway system we have. Robust effort going on in terms of research, certainly at NHTSA, working with the auto industry in terms of the technology evolutions going on in the auto industry, but the challenge for us and for DOTs like Chris's are going to be how do you prepare the infrastructure for that? So that conversation is going on at the federal level with the industry, with the states, in a very robust manner. I mean, I think sometimes it's perceived as, the driverless vehicle, the automated vehicle, the sort of vision that we're just going to sit back, relax, and the cars will drive us. That's a little futuristic, but it's not impossible. I think it's going to happen in phases, and the first phase is going to be vehicle-to-vehicle communication, which is going to be principally about safety. It's going to lead, when you augment it with vehicle-to-infrastructure communication, it's going to lead to the ability to have more vehicles in a certain space going at higher speeds because the technology will allow us to do more of that more safely. So, and that's the young future engineers in this room, well within your lifetime. We are going to see that kind of technology. I think it's going to be, I think we're going to see variations of it in the next decade. Certainly, I think the real potential may exist in the commercial area, where we can equip commercial vehicles to better communicate with infrastructure, because obviously moving freight and the kind of increases we're going to see in freight demand and the more trucks with more cars, more opportunity for conflict, we're going to have to address that as really a priority safety matter. So I think this technology is going to provide significant opportunity in that area in particular. How many students here? You all study, how many are studying civil engineering? I figured since you were ordered by your professor to be here, that was probably the case. How many of you believe that you're on the ground floor of an emerging economic opportunity? Okay, believe it. My son's 28. He is a University of Maine grad, got his MBA there, and he came home. He did his final year abroad, came home and crashed on my futon in Washington in my one-bedroom apartment, because I commute, I live in Maine. for 7 months. This was a few years ago during the recession, so he was out there with 2 million other MBAs looking for his first job. We crafted a strategy. I said, let's look at where are the emerging sectors. You've got an MBA, you want to practice business, you want to be software, is it technology, what is it? And we ended up going through this process, and I'm kind of in the infrastructure business, so I probably had somewhat of a bias, I suppose, but I said, look, this country has got to rebuild infrastructure. We have no choice. I was talking about earlier, it's not discretionary. The country's going to find a way to pay for it. States are going to find a way to pay for it. It's not just public transportation, it's private infrastructure. I was at the Brooklyn Bridge a few weeks ago doing a tour of the infrastructure and the Brooklyn Queens Expressway, and just marveled at a structure that was 180 years old. Guess what? We're going to have to deal with that structure at some point, and they're dealing with it constantly. But when you look at the age of the nation's infrastructure, the opportunities for figuring out how to address that and rebuild it and maintain it, and do so in sustainable ways and with requirements that now exist that didn't exist 50 or 60 or 70 or 100 years ago, is going to require a lot of capability, a lot of talent, a lot of engineers. And the current crop of engineers, the aging out of a lot of talent, a huge brain drain in the engineering community over the next decade that state departments of transportation and all of us in the transportation industry are going to have to deal with. So there's going to be a supply and demand effect on the demand for engineers, which is going to be very good, I think, long-term for earnings capability. But more importantly, I think what you're offering as a result of the kind of education you can get at an institution like this is going to be in great demand, and more importantly, it puts you in a position to make a great contribution to the country. So what you're studying is an important field. You can have a real impact, make a good living, support your family, the American dream. So I hope you take this education and make that kind of commitment with it, because we're going to need you, particularly the students here in this room, because 10 years from now, we're expecting a huge crop of engineers to be retiring in this country, and along the way between now and those 10 years. So it's a good time to study this field. As soon as I figured out back when I was young that it required math, I said, not for me, but anything else? I just want to thank you very much. I've had a wonderful time here tonight. Thanks for giving me an excuse to come home.